Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes for Story Time, and we continue with our Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet. We begin with Part 1, Chapter 3, The Lauriston Gardens Mystery. I confess that I was considerably startled by this fresh proof of practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his powers of analysis increased wondrously. There still remains some lurking suspicion in my mind, however, that the whole thing was a prearranged episode intended to dazzle me, though what earthly object he could have in taking me in was past my comprehension. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note, and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression which showed mental abstraction. "How in the world did you deduce that?" I asked. "Deduce what?" said he, petulantly. "Why, that he was a retired sergeant of marines." "I have no time for trifles," he replied, brusquely. Then, with a smile, "Excuse my rudeness. You broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well. So you actually were not able to see that that man was a sergeant of marines?" "No, indeed." "It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that two and two made four, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Even across the street, I could see a great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand. That smacked of the sea. He had a military carriage, however, and regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marine. He was a man with some amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must have observed the way in which he held his head and swung his cane. A steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too, on the face of him. All facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant." "Wonderful!" I ejaculated. "Commonplace," said Holmes, though I thought from his expression that he was pleased at my evident surprise and admiration. "I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this." He threw me over the note which the commissionaire had brought. Why, I cried as I cast my eye over it. "This is terrible!" "It does seem to be a little out of the common," he remarked, calmly. "Would you mind reading it to me aloud?" This is the letter which I read to him. "Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business during the night at 3 Lauriston Gardens, off the Brixton Road. Our man on the beat saw a light there about 2 in the morning, and as the house was an empty one, suspected that something was amiss. He found the door open, and in the front room, which is bare of furniture, discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed and having cards in his pocket bearing the name Enoch J. Drebber, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. There had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence of how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there is no wound upon this person. We are at a loss as to how he came into the empty house. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come round to the house any time before 12, you will find me there. I have left everything in saluto quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller details and would esteem it a great kindness if you would favor me with your opinion. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson." "Gregson is the smartest of the Scotland Yarders," my friend remarked. "He and Lestrade are the pick of the bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventional, shockingly so. They have their knives into each other, too. They are jealous as a pair of professional beauties. There will be some fun over this case if they are both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm way in which he rippled on. "Surely there is not a moment to be lost," I cried. "Shall I go and order you a cab?" "I am not sure about whether I shall go. I am the most incurably lazy devil that ever stood in shoe leather, that is, when the fit is on for me. For I can be spry enough at times. Why, it is just such a chance as you have been longing for. My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, you may be sure that Gregson and Lestrade and Company will pocket all the credit. That comes of being an unofficial personage." "But he begs you to help him." "Yes, he knows that I am his superior and acknowledges it to me, but he would cut his tongue out before he would own it to any third person. However, we may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them, if they have nothing else. Come on." He hustled on his overcoat and bustled about in a way that showed that an energetic fit had superseded the apathetic one. "Get your hat," he said. "You wish me to come?" "Yes, if you have nothing better to do." A minute later we were both in a hansom, driving furiously for Brixton Road. It was a foggy, cloudy morning, and a dun-colored veil hung over the housetops, looking like the reflection of the mud-colored streets beneath. My companion was in the best spirits, and prattled away about Cremona fiddles, and the difference between the Stradivarius and the Amati. As for myself, I was silent, for a dull weather and the melancholy business upon which we were engaged depressed my spirits. "You don't seem to give much thought to this matter at hand," I said at last, interrupting Holmes' musical disquisition. "No data yet," he answered. "It is a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment." "You will have your data soon," I remarked, pointing with my finger. "This is the Brixton Road, and that is the house, if I am not very much mistaken." "So it is. Stop, driver, stop." We were still 100 yards or so from it, but he insisted upon our alighting, and we finished our journey upon foot. Number 3, Lauriston Gardens, wore an ill-omened and minatory look. It was one of 4 which stood back some little way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary, save that here and there a "To Let" card had developed a little cataract upon the bleared panes. A small garden sprinkled over with a scattered eruption of sickly plants separated each one of these houses from the street, and was traversed by a narrow pathway, yellowish in color and consisting apparently of a mixture of clay and gravel. The whole place was very sloppy from the rain, which had fallen through the night. The garden was bounded by a 3-foot brick wall, with a fringe of wood rails upon the top, and against this wall was leaning a stalwart police constable, surrounded by a small knot of loafers, who craned their necks and strained their eyes in the vain hope of catching some glimpse of the proceedings within. I had imagined that Sherlock Holmes would at once have hurried into the house and plunged into the study of the mystery. Nothing appeared to be further from his intention. With an air of nonchalance, which, under the circumstances, seemed to me to border upon affection, he lounged up and down the pavement and gazed vacantly at the ground, the sky, the opposite houses, and the line of railings. Having finished his scrutiny, he proceeded slowly down the path, or rather down the fringe of grass which flanked the path, keeping his eyes riveted upon the ground. Twice he stopped, and twice I saw him smile, and heard him utter an exclamation of satisfaction. There were many marks of footsteps upon the wet, clayey soil, but since the police had been coming and going over it, it was unable to see how my companion could hope to learn anything from it. Still, I had had such extraordinary evidence of the quickness of his perceptive faculties that I had no doubt that he could see a great deal which was hidden from me. At the door of the house, we were met by a tall, white-faced, flaxen-haired man with a notebook in his hand, who rushed forward and wrung my companion's hand with effusion. "It is indeed kind of you to come," he said. "I have had everything left untouched." "Expect that," my friend answered, pointing to the pathway. "If a herd of buffaloes had passed along, there could not be a greater mess, no doubt. However, you had drawn your own conclusions, Gregson, before you permitted this." "I've had so much to do inside the house," the detective said, evasively. "My colleague, Mr. Lestrade, is here. I had relied upon him to look after this." Holmes glanced at me and raised his eyebrows sardonically. "With two such men as yourself and Lestrade upon the ground, there will not be much for a third to find out," he said. Gregson rubbed his hands in a self-satisfied way. "I think we have done all that can be done," he answered. "It's a queer case, though, and I knew your taste for such things." "You did not come here in a cab?" asked Sherlock Holmes. "No, sir." "No, nor Lestrade?" "No, sir." "Then let us go and look at the room." With which inconsequent remark he strode on to the house, followed by Gregson, whose features expressed his astonishment. A short passage, bare, planked, and dusty, led to the kitchen and offices. Two doors opened out of it to the left and to the right. One of these had obviously been closed for many weeks. The other belonged to the dining room, which was the apartment in which the mysterious affair had occurred. Holmes walked in, and I followed him with that subdued feeling at my heart which the presence of death inspires. It was a large, square room, looking all the larger for the absence of all furniture. A vulgar, flaring paper adorned the walls, but it was blotched in places with mildew, and here and there great strips had become detached and hung down, exposing the yellow plaster beneath. Opposite the door was a showy fireplace, surmounted by a mantelpiece of imitation white marble. On one other corner of this was stuck the stump of a red wax candle. The solitary window was so dirty that the light was hazy and uncertain, giving a dull gray tinge to everything, which was intensified by the thick layer of dust which coated the whole apartment. All of these details I observed afterwards. At present my attention was centered upon the single grim, motionless figure which lay stretched upon the boards, with vacant, sightless eyes, staring up at the discolored ceiling. It was that of a man about 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad-shouldered, with crisp, curling black hair and a short, stubbly beard. He was dressed in a heavy broadcloth frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers and immaculate collar and cuffs. A top hat, well brushed and trim, was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown abroad, while his lower limbs were interlocked, as though his death struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face there stood an expression of horror and, as it seemed to me, of hatred, such as I have never seen upon the human face. This malignant and terrible contortion, combined with the low forehead, blunt nose, and progenitaceous jaw, gave the dead man a singularly simious and ape-like appearance, which was increased by his writhing, unnatural posture. I have seen death in many forms, but never has it appeared to me in a more fearsome aspect than in the dark, grimy apartment which looked out upon one of the main arteries of suburban London. Lestrade, lean and ferret-like as ever, was standing by the doorway and greeted my companion and myself. "This case will make a stir, sir," he remarked. "It beats anything I have seen, and I am no chicken." "There is no clue?" said Gregson. "None at all," chimed Lestrade. Sherlock Holmes approached the body and, kneeling down, examined it intently. "You are sure there is no wound?" he asked, pointing to numerous gouts and splashes of blood which lay all around. "Positive," cried both detectives. Then, of course, this blood belongs to a second individual, presumably the murderer. If the murder had been committed, it reminds me of the circumstances attendant on the death of Van Jensen in Utrecht in the year 34. Do you remember the case, Gregson? No, sir. Read up on it. You really should. There is nothing new under the sun. It has all been done before. As he spoke, his nimble fingers were flying here and there and everywhere, feeling, pressing, unbuttoning, examining, while his eyes wore the same faraway expression which I have already remarked upon. So swiftly was the examination made that one would hardly have guessed the minuteness with which it was conducted. Finally, he sniffed the dead man's lips, and then glanced at the soles of his patent leather boots. He has not been moved at all? He asked. No more than was necessary for the purpose of examination. You can take him to the mortuary now, he said. There is nothing more to be learned. Gregson had a stretcher and 4 men at hand. At his call, they entered the room, and the stranger was lifted and carried out. As they raised him, a ring tinkled down and rolled across the floor. Lestrade grabbed it up and stared at it with mystified eyes. There's been a woman here, he cried. It's a woman's wedding ring. He held it out as he spoke, upon the palm of his hand. We all gathered round him and gazed at it. There could be no doubt that the circle of plain gold had once adorned the finger of a bride. This complicates matters, said Gregson. Heavens knows they would complicate enough before, and now even more complicated. You're sure it doesn't simplify them, observed Holmes. There's nothing to be learned by staring at it. What did you find in his pockets? We have it all here, said Gregson, pointing to a litter of objects upon one of the bottom steps of the stairs. A gold watch, number 97,163, by Brand of London. Gold Albert chain, very heavy and solid. Gold ring with Masonic device. Gold pin, bulldog's head, with rubies as eyes. Russian leather cardboard case with cards of Enoch J. Drebber of Cleveland, corresponding with the EJD upon the linen. No purse, but loose money to the extent of £7.13. Pocket edition of Boccacio's Decameron with the name of Joseph Strangeson upon a flyleaf. The 2 letters, one addressed to E.J. Drebber and one to Joseph Strangerson. At what address? American Exchange. Strand to be left till called for. They are both from the Guinean Steamship Company and refer to the sailing of their boats from Liverpool. It is clear that this unfortunate man was about to return to New York. Have you made any inquiries as to this man Stangerson? I did at once, sir, said Gregson. I have the advertisements sent to all the newspapers, and one of my men has gone to the American Exchange, but has not yet returned. Have you sent to Cleveland? We telegraphed this morning. How did you word the inquiries? We simply detailed the circumstances and said we should be glad for any information which could help us. You did not ask for particulars on any point which appeared to you to be crucial? I asked about Strangerson. Nothing else. Is there no circumstance on which the whole case appears to hinge? Will you not telegraph again? I have said all I have to say, said Gregson, in an offhanded voice. Sherlock Holmes chuckled to himself and appeared to be about to make some remark when Lestrade, who had been in the front of the room while we were holding this conversation in the hall, reappeared upon the scene, rubbing his hands in a pompous and self-satisfied manner. Mr. Gregson, he said, I have just made a discovery of the highest importance, and one which would have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls. The little man's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and he was evidently in a state of suppressed exultation at having scored a point against his colleague. Come here, he said, bustling back into the room, and the atmosphere of which felt cleaner since the removal of its ghastly inmate. Now stand there. He struck a match on his boot and held it up against the wall. Look at that, he said triumphantly. I have remarked that the paper had fallen away in parts. In this particular corner of the room, a large piece had peeled off, leaving a yellow square of coarse plastering. Across this bare space there was scrawled in blood-red letters a single word: Rachi. What do you think of that? Cried the detective, with the air of a showman exhibiting his show. This was overlooked because it was in the darkest corner of the room, and no one thought of looking there. The murderer has written it with his or her own blood. See the smear where it was trickled down the wall? That disposes of the idea of suicide. Anyhow, why was there that corner chosen to write it on? I will tell you. See that candle on the mantelpiece? It was lit at the same time, and if it was lit, this corner would be the brightest instead of the darkest portion of the wall. And what does it mean now that you have found it? Said Gregson in a depreciatory voice. Mean? Why, it means that the writer was going to put the female name Rachel, but was disturbed before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words, when the case comes to be cleared up, you will find that a woman named Rachel has something to do with it. It's all very well for you to laugh, Mr. Holmes. You may be very smart and clever, but the old hound is the best when all else is said and done. I really beg your pardon, said my companion, who had ruffled the little man's temper by bursting into an explosion of laughter. You certainly have the credit of being the first of us to find this out, and as you say, it bears every mark of having been written by the other participant in the last night's mystery. I have not yet had time to examine the room yet, but with your permission I shall do so now. As he spoke, he whipped a tape measure and a large round magnifying glass from his pocket. With these two implements, he trotted noiselessly about the room, sometimes stopping, occasionally kneeling, and once lying flat upon his face. So engrossed was he with occupation that he appeared to have forgotten our presence, for he chattered away to himself under his breath the whole time, keeping up a running fire of exclamations, groans, whistles, and little cries suggestive of encouragement and hope. As I watched him, I was irresistibly reminded of pure-blooded, well-trained foxhound as it dashes backward and forward through the covert, whining in its eagerness until it comes across the lost scent. For 20 minutes or more he continued his researches, measuring with the most exact care the distance between the marks, which were entirely invisible to me, and occasionally applying his tape to the walls of the equally incomprehensible manner in which one place he gathered very carefully a little pile of gray dust from the floor and packed it away in an envelope. Finally, he examined with his glass the word upon the wall, going over every letter of it with the most minute exactness. When this was done, he appeared to be satisfied, for he replaced his tape and his glass in his pocket. They say that genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains, he remarked with a smile. It is a very bad definition, but it does apply to detective work. Gregson and Lestrade had watched the maneuvers of their amateur companion with considerable curiosity and some contempt. They evidently failed to appreciate the fact, which I had begun to realize, that Sherlock Holmes's smallest actions were all directed towards some definite and practical end. What do you think of it, sir? They both asked. It would be robbing you of the credit of the case if I was to presume to help you, remarked my friend. You are doing so well now that it would be a pity for any one to interfere. There was a world of sarcasm in his voice as he spoke. If you will let me know how your investigations go, he continued, I shall be happy to give you any help I can. In the meantime, I should like to speak to the constable who found the body. Can you give me his name and address? Lestrade glanced at his notebook. John Rance, he said. He is off duty now. You will find him at 46 Audley Court, Kennington Park Gate. Holmes took a note of the address. Come along, doctor, he said. We shall go and look him up. I'll tell you one thing, which may help you in the case, he continued, turning to the two detectives. There had been a murder done. That is to say, there has been a murder done. And the murderer was a man. He was more than 6 feet high and in the prime of his life, had small feet for his height, wore coarse, square-toed boots, and smoked like a trinopathy cigar. He came here with his victim in a four-wheeled cab, which was drawn by a horse with 3 old shoes and one new, one off his foreleg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, and the fingernails of his right hand were remarkably long. These are only a few indications, but they may assist you. Lestrade and Gregson glanced at each other with an incredulous smile. If this man has murdered, how was it done? Asked the former. Position, said Sherlock Holmes curtly, and strode off. One other thing, Lestrade, he added, turning round at the door. Rache is the German for revenge. So don't lose your time looking for Miss Rachel. With which Parthian shot he walked away, leaving the two rivals open-mouthed behind him. Chapter 5. What John Range Had to Sell. It was 1 o'clock when we left number 3 Lauriston Gardens. Sherlock Holmes led me to the nearest telegraph office, whence he dispatched a long telegram. He then hailed a cab and ordered the driver to take us to the address given to us by Lestrade. There is nothing like first-hand evidence, he remarked. As a matter of fact, my mind is entirely made up upon the case, but still, we may as well learn all that has to be learned. You amaze me, Holmes, said I. Surely you're not as you pretend to be of all those particulars which you gave. There's no room for a mistake, he answered. The very first thing which I observed in the room there was a cab had made 2 ruts with its wheels close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have had no rain for a week, so that those wheels which left the deep impression must have been there during the night. There were 2 marks on the horse's hooves, too, the outline of which one was far more clearly cut than the other 3, showing that it was a new shoe. Since the cab was there after the rain began, and was not there at any time during the morning, I have Gregson's word for that. It follows that it must have been during the night, and therefore that it brought those 2 individuals to the house. That seems simple enough, said I, but how about the other man's height? Why, the height of a man, in 9 cases out of 10, can be told from the length of his stride. It's a simple calculation enough, though there is no use my boring you with these figures. I had this fellow's stride both on the clay outside and on the dust within. Then I had a way of checking my calculation. When a man writes on a wall, his instinct leads him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now that the writing was just over 6 feet from the ground, it was child's play. And his age, I asked? Well, if a man can stride 4 or 4.5 feet without the smallest effort, he can't be quite the sear and yellow. This was the breadth of a puddle on the garden, which he had evidently walked across. Patent leather boots had gone round, and the square-toed boots had hopped over. There is no mystery about it at all. I am simply applying to ordinary life a few of the precepts of observation and deduction which I advocated in the article. Is there anything else that puzzles you? The fingernails on the trinopoli, I suggested. The writing on the wall was done with a man's finger dipped in blood. My glass followed me to observe that the plaster was slightly scratched in doing it, which would not have been the case if the man's nail had been trimmed. I gathered up some scattered ash from the floor. It was dark in color and flaky. Such an ash is only made by trichinopoly. I have made a special study of cigars. In fact, I have written a monograph on the subject. I flatter myself that I can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand of cigar and tobacco. It's just in such details that the skilled detective differs from Gregson and Lestrade. And the florid face, I asked? Ah, that was more daring, though. I have no doubts that I was right. You must not ask me that my present state of mind of the affair. I passed my hand over my brow. My head was a swirl, marked the more one thinks of, the more mysterious one grows. How came these two men, if they were two men, into an empty house? What has become of the cabman who drove him? Who could one man compel? Could one man compel another to take poison? Where did the blood come from? What was the object of the murder, since the robbery had no part in it? How came the woman's ring there? Above all, why should a second man write up the German word Rache before decamping? I confess that I cannot see any possible way of reconciling these facts. My companion smiled approvingly. You sum up the difficulties of the situation succinctly and well, he said. There is much that is still obscure, though I have quite made up my mind on the main facts. As to poor Lestrade's discovery, it was simply a blind intended to put up the police on the wrong track. By suggesting socialism and secret societies, it was not done by a German. The A, if you noticed, was printed somewhere after the German fashion. Now a real German invariably prints the Latin character, so that we may safely say that it was not written by one, but by a clumsy imitator who overdid his part. It was simply a ruse to divert our inquiry into the wrong sword channel. I am not going to tell you much more of the case, Doctor. You know, a conqueror gets no credit when once he has explained his trick. And if I show you, too, much of my method of working will come to the conclusion that I am a very ordinary individual after all. Ah, I shall never do that, I answered. You have brought detection as your near inexact science as it ever will be brought into the world. My companion fleshed up with pleasure at my words, and the earnest way in which I uttered them. I had already observed that he was sensitive to flattery, on the score of his art, as any girl could be of her beauty. I'll tell you one thing. Just one other thing, he said. Patent Leathers and Square Toes came in the same cab, and they walked down the path together, as friendly as possible, arm in arm. In all probability, when they got inside, they walked up and down the stairs, or rather, Patent Leathers stood still while Square Toes walked up and down. I could read all in the dust, and I could read that as he walked up and down, he grew more and more excited. That is shown by the increased length of his strides. He was talking all while working himself up, no doubt into a fury. Then the tragedy occurred. I've told you all I know myself. Now, for the rest is mere surmise and conjecture. We have a good working basis, however, on which to start. We must hurry up, for I want to go to Hale's concert to hear Norman Neruda this afternoon. The conversation had occurred while in our cab and had been threading its way through the long succession of dingy streets and dreary byways. In the dingiest and dreariest one of them, our driver suddenly came to a stand. "That's Audley Court there," he said, pointing to a narrow slit in the line of dead-colored brick. "You'll never find me on it there. We try to go up every summer, but you'll never find me there." "You'll find me here when you come back." Audley Court was not an attractive locality. The narrow passage led us into a quadrangle paved with flags and lined with sordid dwellings. We picked our way through among groups of dirty children and through lines of discolored linen until we came to number 46, the door of which was decorated with small slip of brass, on which the name Rance was engraved. On inquiry, we found the constable was in bed, and we were shown into the front little parlor to await his coming. He appeared presently, looking a little irritable at the being disturbed at this hours as he slumbers. "I made my report to the office," he said. Holmes took half a sovereign from his pocket and played with it pensively. "I thought that we should like to hear it all from your own lips." "I shall be most happy to tell you anything I can," the constable answered, with his eyes upon the little golden disc. "Just let us hear it all in your own way, as it occurred." Rance sat down on the horse-hair sofa and knitted his brows, as though determined not to omit anything in his narrative. "I'll tell ye from the beginning," he said. "My time is from 10 at night till 6 in the morning. At 11 there was a fight at the White Hart, but bar that, all was quiet enough on the beat. At 1 in the morning it all began to rain, and I met Harry Mutcher, him who has the Holland Grove beat, and we stood together at the corners of Henrietta Street and a talkin'. Presently, maybe about 2 or a little after, I thought I would take a look round and see that all was right down at Brixton Road. It was a precious dirty and lonely time. Not a soul did I meet all the way down, though a cab or two went past me. I was strolling down, thinking between ourselves how uncommon handy a 4-a-gin hot would be, when suddenly a glint of light caught my eye in the window of that same house. Now I knew that them 2 houses in Lauriston Gardens was empty on account of him. Who owns them? Who won't have the drains seed to? Though the very last tenant what lived in one of them died o' typhoid fever, I was knocked all in a heap. Therefore, at seeing a light in the window, I suspected something was wrong. When I got to the door, you stopped, and then you walked back to the garden gate." My companion interrupted. "What did you do that for?" Rance gave a violent jump and stared at Sherlock with the utmost amazement on his features. Why, that's true, sir, he said, though how you come to know it, heaven only knows. You see, when I got up to the floor, it was still and so lonesome that I thought I'd be none more the worse for someone with me. I ain't feared of anything of this side of the grave, but I thought that maybe it was him that died. Oh, the typhoid's inspecting the drains that killed him. The thought gave me a kind of turn. And I walked back to the gate to see if I could see Murcher's lantern, but there wasn't no sign of him, nor any of anyone else. There was no one in the street, not a living soul, sir, nor as much as a dog. Then I pulled myself together and went back and pushed the door open. All was quiet inside. So I went into the room where the light was a burning. There was a cradle freckling on freckling on the mantelpiece, a red wax one, and by its light I saw, yes, I know all that you saw. You walked around the room several times and you knelt down by the body, and then you walked through and tried the kitchen door, and then John Rance sprang to his feet with a frightened face and suspicion in his eyes. Where was you hid to see all that? He cried. It seems to me that you knows a deal more than you should. Holmes laughed and threw his card across the table to the constable. Don't get arresting me for the murder, he said. I am one of the hounds and not the wolf. Mr. Gregson and Mr. Lestrade, will answer for that. Go on, though. What did you do next? Rance resumed his seat without, however, losing his mystified expression. I went back to the gate and sounded my whistle. But what brought Murcher and two more to the spot? I was at street empty. Was that street empty? Then? Well, it was as far as anybody that I could be of any good ones goes. What do you mean? The constable's features broadened in a grin. I've seen many a drunk chap in my time, he said, but never anyone so crying drunk as that cove. He was at the gate when I came out, a-leaning up against the railings and singing at the pitch of his lungs about Columbine's newfangled banner or some such stuff. He couldn't stand, far less help. What sort of man is he? Asked Sherlock Holmes. John Rance appeared to be somewhat irritated by the digression. He was an uncommon drunk sort. That sort of man, he said. He'd found himself at the station if we hadn't been able to take up some of those. He was took up, for sure. Either took up with himself or took up with something on his mind. His face, his dress, didn't you notice them? Holmes broke in impatiently. I should think I did notice them, seeing that I had to prop him up, me and Murcher, between us. He was a long chap, with a red face, and lower part muffled round. That'll do, cried Holmes. What became of him? We'd enough to do without looking after him, the policeman said, in an aggrieved voice. I'll wager he found his way home all right. How was he dressed? A brown overcoat. Had he a whip in his hand? A whip? No. He must have left it behind, muttered my companion. You didn't happen to see or hear a cab after that? No. There's a half-sovereign for you, my companion said, standing up and taking his hat. I'm afraid, Rance, that you will never rise in the force. That head of yours should be for use as well as ornament. You might have gained your sergeant's stripes last night. The man whom you held in your hands is the man who holds the clue of this mystery, and whom we are seeking. There is no use of arguing about it now. I tell you That is so. Come along, Doctor. We started off for the cab together, leaving our informant incredulous but obviously uncomfortable. The blundering fool, Holmes said bitterly as we drove back to our lodgings. Just to think of his having such an incomparable bit of good luck and not taking advantage of it. I am rather in the dark still. It is true that the description of this man tallies with your idea of the second party in the mystery. But what should he come back to the house after leaving it? What should he have to come back to the house for? This is not the way this is not the way of criminals. The ring man, the ring, and that was what he came back for. If we have no other way of catching him, we can always bait our line with the ring. I shall have him, Doctor. I'll lay you 2-1 that I have him. I must thank you for it all. I might not have gone but for you. And so you have missed the finest study I ever came across. A study in Scarlet, eh? Why shouldn't we use a little art jargon? There's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skein of life, and our duty is to unravel it and isolate it and expose every inch of it. And now for lunch, and then for Norman Neruda. Her attack and her bowing are splendid. What's the little thing of Chopin's she plays so magnificently? Tra la 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 la. Leaning back in his cab, the amateur bloodhound controlled away like a lark while meditating upon the many sidelines of the human mind. And that is all we have time for tonight, my friends. We will continue this again. I don't know if I'll have time to record another episode on Wednesday for Wednesday afternoon. But if I can, I will. And if I can't, then I will record one for Thursday. All right, my friends, this has been Indiana Holmes for Story Time. Thank you for joining us. Love to all. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.